In order to understand how much water is coming out of a river, we need to understand a term called discharge. Discharge is going to be a primary factor in determining how much erosion is going to take place and how much deposition is going to take place. There is a nice, clear relationship between the higher the volume of water and the amount of work that it can do. So when we've got a high discharge, a high volume of water, which is being transported, we can do a lot of work. When the volume of water diminishes, the work then also diminishes. So in flood events, when the waters in river systems swell, we can erode a lot of material and we can transport a lot of material. When that volume of water diminishes after a flood event or during a drought period, then the erosion capacity is limited, the transportation capacity is limited, and we're depositing more material. All right. The discharge then also will affect how that river behaves and how it will, what we call, meander down the side of a landscape. So back to this illustration that we showed you right at the beginning of this slide series. So we said that landscapes are the product of erosion, transportation, and deposition. And in this slide, we're going to delineate the erosion, transportation, and deposition into 3 zones. The first zone is where we're going to have the highest volume of erosion. These are the highest elevation landscapes, but not always where we have the highest volume of precipitation. We call these the collection areas, but again, we can have dry mountain environments, and those rivers from those dry mountain environments could empty into a moisture environment where there happens to be more precipitation taking place. That could happen. But for the most part, because we've got a high elevated environment, we have a high volume of potential energy. And when you have a high volume of potential energy, we create something called hydrologic head, which means we've got gravity in our favor, and we can then create with the little bit of water that is there, if there happens to only be a little bit, a large amount of collecting of the water, but also material that is being eroded. All right. So the transportation zone, which is this middle zone, then has a large volume of material in it that was collected from the zone 1. So the river is much wider, and nature's pretty interesting. It doesn't want to create a lot of erosion. We've got a high capacity here. The discharge is high, and so with a high discharge, we have the ability to create a lot of erosion. In order to minimize the work here, the river starts to meander. It starts to create these big bends, and it does so to slow itself down. By increasing the length of the river in this zone, it does less work. And that's important because otherwise we would have deep, deep canyons in this area. We would lose a lot of matter. So the transportation system has always a changing river area. Satellite images of the Mississippi will show us where the Mississippi has been historically. There are river scars with oxbow lakes and meanders all throughout the greater Mississippi River drainage basin of the historic area for the Mississippi River. The location of the Mississippi River now is only temporary. That river is going to change locations in the future as the river continues to meander back and forth before it hits the last zone, zone 3, which is the deposition zone. This is where the landscape is the most shallow. Because it's shallow here, we're losing energy. The water starts to spread out And as it spreads out, it loses discharge in each one of these channels. It loses the ability to move matter, so it's going to, therefore, it drops material out. It's creating a landscape here. So the stuff here in the delta, which is where water and the material that was carried by that river get deposited. All this stuff in the delta was eroded from this area right here. So when you look at places like New Orleans, which is a delta area of the Mississippi, what you're looking at is all the stuff that was eroded out of the Appalachians, out of Ohio, out of Tennessee, out of upper Minnesota, out of the Dakotas, out of the Rocky Mountains. That stuff over millions and millions of years was dumped to create the edge of the continent at that location. Every river does this.